Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast. I'm curious, do you remember the days where life consisted of go to school, get job, keep job, maybe get a carriage clock or a watch at the end of it all, along with a pat on the back and a thank you for 40 years service? Probably not. Those days have long gone. And more recently, people have been expected to leave school, get a job, stay in that role for 3 years and move on as they grow and progress in their career. But during those 3 years, they were expected to live and breathe the company and its values. But more recently, I'm also noticing a new trend where that is changing too. Because as the name suggests, the term polyworking means working for more than one employer. But it can also mean building a passion project or a side hustle outside of those working hours that really makes a person feel happy. And I've spoken to a few guests lately whose employer is actively encouraging these passion projects rather than crushing their dreams, saying, hey, stick to the 9 to 5. So we have employees building side hustles and passion projects. We've got employers supporting their employees, knowing they'll get more from them. But traditional online communities like, let's say, LinkedIn, are not serving those who want to be doing more than just one thing. So today I've invited Peter Johnston to join me on the podcast and share how the company Polywork is a place to discover opportunities and collaborate with other professionals. And on this podcast, I always say that tech works best when it brings people together, but I want to learn more about how they're doing this to help anyone seeking more from their life than a 9 to 5 can collaborate with others to discuss big topics such as how do they get started, how do they diversify their portfolio, how do they pick up new skills and work streams to soften the blow in case they was ever to fall victim to that next layoff. This is a subject very close to my heart as someone that built a side hustle and is here talking to you every day as a result of that. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Brooklyn, where Peter is going to join us and talk about all this and share how he sees the future of work. So, massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all, Neil. I'm Peter Johnston. I'm the founder and CEO of Polywork. It's unusual the way I intro this, but I guess if LinkedIn is the professional network for the 9 to 5 generation, we've now sort of entered this generation where everyone collaborates way beyond the 9 to 5 with one another. And so whether that's starting a side project or a podcast or mentoring, coaching, whether it's for a pure passion project or, side income, we've sort of become the professional network for collaboration. So we're where you go to find those people to work on those additional things, those passion projects, those side income projects.
And I'd love to take you back in time for a moment and learn more about how these worlds collided for you and how you got this current role. Can you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that put you on this path?
So I went to university in Belfast, and then for those that don't, that's a small city in the north of Ireland. And I studied computer science for like 1 year and dropped out. And then I went back and actually did very unusual, like public relations and advertising. So pretty generic degree. But I started at the time, which was super random, just learning to design, like graphic design. This was back when I'm talking like 2006, 2007, just, anything I could get my hands on, designing restaurant menus or logos, for like local stuff. And so that kind of led me to this like weird blend of, I knew enough about tech to be, dangerous. And then I'd started to learn design and I kind of had this like business sort of mix. And so I ended up landing in a couple of like advertising and PR agencies in London. Like most folks wanted to go work in like one of the larger agencies, like across the water. And so I ended up at a couple of them and then finally at M&C Saatchi. And they were like a pretty large agency. And they just had a ton of tech clients, like our earliest tech client. I was doing more of like the digital design. Like this was truly back when the Facebook and Twitter icons were just making its way onto like posters and just making their way onto like the footer of websites. This was that long ago. Wow. And we had Spotify, Twitter, there was a bunch of other, I'm trying to think, like some more like consumer sort of like actual tech product clients. And I'd loved storytelling from the advertising side of it and public relations side of it, but I'd never seen like more exciting teams and the impact that those tech companies were having. It was just like we had clients that weren't in tech and were doing great things, and then you added the tech clients, and just the scale at which they could reach people was like nothing. I mean, I was like, 2 years out of a small seaside town in the north of Ireland. They're talking about numbers that our other customers, other clients, it's actually just like can't even comprehend. And so that was what first piqued my interest, was like working on some of those clients. And then I really weirdly at the time just wasn't really feeling the advertising public relations side as much. I had been inspired by those tech clients. I really started to get into teaching myself design. And about a year and a half later, I landed at Google in London, which was kind of unusual. And for a self-taught designer who hadn't studied design to end up there kind of doing his thing. But the London office, I will caveat, was much smaller than like the Silicon Valley offices of Google. And yeah, that was when that was when everything changed. And I know that they have their own criticisms of how big they are and slow they are, but I certainly learned most of what I know there. And I met most of my network that became my network to come on and become a tech founder there. In particular, I really got my start when I did a 20% project. They kind of made famous, they're like, one day a week you can work on something else around the company. And mine was with Google Campus at the time. That was like the startup kind of like helping fund startups and give them advice. And so I just kind of was there every Friday, giving advice on UX and design and how they could take, advantage of, Google's capabilities. And, I think it was like one day and I saw an entrepreneur and was like, well, that seems like a lot more fun than what I'm currently doing. And yeah, the kind of rest was history. I lasted about a year and a half in the big giant, and you experience at a big companies that got just so many big problems that need solving. And I think as soon as I have that trait where I get addicted to solving a problem, and then just a combination of things throughout my earlier career had said that, well, tech's the only real way you can solve the problem at a scale that would have like a crazy impact. And so hopefully a succinct enough, version of the weird and wonderful way I got into founding a company. So I left Google in 2014, founded my first company, which was trying to solve the same problem I'm actually trying to solve with Polywork. So most don't know this, but this is my 9th year.
Wow.
I've entered my 9th year trying to, not with this company, Polywork is only 2 years old, but trying to solve the general problem of how hard it is to connect with professionals online, and the bar there being quite low. But I'll stop there.
Your time at Google, was it all foosball tables, slides, bikes, and multicolored beanbags? Was that still a thing back then?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely it's super topical right now. With Elon coming in and kind of like gutting Twitter, and just in general, tech is having a lot of layoffs. And could they have? Look, what I will say is, I loved it there, but it wasn't a culture fit for me. Like, I'd come from junior university, I worked in a restaurant, which was 14-hour shifts from like 10 to midnight sometimes, and I did love hard work. And I remember I was actually talking to friends at a dinner, some colleagues at a dinner last night about this, that, I remember finishing most of what I had to do. And that was actually how I landed on the 20% project, because I went to my manager at the time. And also agencies in the UK were intense. I'm sure agencies anywhere are intense, but you work a lot. You work a lot of hours for not a lot of pay. And I landed there and I finished up what I was working on. And my new manager, who'd also come from an agency background, Patrick Hollister, I said, like, when can I get started on the next thing? He was like, there is no next thing yet. And I was like, okay, well, where can I read about it to just get a jump start? And he literally sat me down and was like, it's just not really how it works here. Like, it's just a different piece. So I'd encourage you to make the most of it, network, maybe you get a 20% project, like just try and be helpful where you can. And my role was just not needed 45, like the standard, whatever it is, 45, 50 hours, let alone the 100 I've been working, at those agencies. And I think I could very logically see how that would compound and lead to a lot of bloat in a big company like that, where maybe there is a little bit too much of the beanbags and hanging around. Whereas that's when actually between intense working in a kitchen, I worked on I forgot the political company and I worked on in the UK, but I mean, Northern Irish politics are a little divided, so I usually skip that. But just all of that led to, I just like working hard, and I love being scrappy, and it's just not really the place to go and be that. But it is the place to learn a ton, work with incredibly smart people, but it's just not a fast-paced, intense environment. And I love fast-paced, intense learning every week, trying something new, putting like something out into the world, seeing if people like it. Like I love that early stage stuff. And there was less opportunity to do that, really.
And it's interesting, if you look back there, you can see your work ethic and also your love of helping people out and collaborating with others would lead you to Polywork, which is a place to discover opportunities to collaborate with other professionals, like you said. So for people that are hearing about Polywork for the very first time, you just tell me a little bit more about the company and those problems that you set out to solve with it.
Yeah. It was really the problem. So it's a professional network. And I think that any professional network that launches, I feel like, just due to the incredible job LinkedIn has done at being for the last 2 decades, nearly, the professional network of record. I think every new one that launches gets lumped in with like, are you a better LinkedIn? Or, pretty much for the first 12 months, people were like, oh, it's a prettier LinkedIn. And back to what I was mentioning at the start, we were chatting, I think if LinkedIn connects you to 9-to-5 opportunities, but there are literally millions of other ways in which you want to connect with professionals, like to invite people to your podcast or see who wants to speak at events or start a side project or angel invest. And so Polywork really takes all the other ways that people and professionals want to connect and collaborate and makes it easy to discover them. And so we've just become this like place for discovering collaborators. And so, want to see which entrepreneurs based in Brooklyn that have raised funding for social media apps are open to speaking on podcasts. You can just search that. And so we really just become this discovery engine for people that want to collaborate beyond their 9-to-5, and so in that sense, very much complementary to LinkedIn. They tackle 9-to-5 and we tackle all of the other kind of collaboration opportunities that I think as I look, what does the next 20 years look like? I only see the need for people to connect and collaborate beyond their 9-to-5 increasing. And so that's really the bet that we're making, is that the current platforms and infrastructure just are really set up, and almost every software has been optimized to connect people for 9-to-5 work. And I think particularly post-pandemic, people are realizing maybe they want to pursue a passion project, or maybe they don't want to be reliant on purely their income from their 9-to-5 job, because it can be taken away, as the last few months of, particularly in tech, have demonstrated. And so if you could make additional income while pursuing a passion project, I think that's like a plus. It's a lot of wins for a lot of people.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny you should say that, because when I first visited your website, my first reaction was, wow, this feels like a much younger, fresher and cooler LinkedIn. But then I was chatting to someone yesterday, a leader of a big business, and they were saying that traditionally employers didn't want their staff looking at passion projects or having side hustles. But now that attitude's completely changed, and the employers are actually encouraging their staff to go out and do that stuff. So when I look at your site now, it feels like this platform for individuals to showcase their current projects and activities, rather than just relying on traditional linear resumes, which just feel better. It just all feels better suited to a modern workplace. Was that always your intention?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's funny, I remember starting my first company after Google, and I couldn't even work on it on the side because there were such ironclad, if you write a line of code on this thing, Google has a claim to it type of stuff. And even now you're right. It is totally switched, I think, and particularly in tech for sure. I know there are more traditional industries that are probably not encouraging people to polywork and work on side projects, but the intention was really, this is one of the blessings and a curse starting a company when you don't have an idea for the product, but you know what problem you want to solve. And I think it's maybe for better or worse, the reason I'm in my 9th year, still trying to work out what is the perfect UX and UI that will deliver and solve this problem. And the problem I really set out to solve was that I think most social media, and I don't know how old the internet is now, particularly social media is maybe 10, 12, maybe 15, maybe Facebook's been around for 15 years or so. And I think the problem with it is that who we are online, for the most part, with the big players, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, has or LinkedIn, your identity is really like a bio. And then just this scattered snapshot of information across hundreds of sites. And LinkedIn, of course, it's just your resume. And I think both the reason I mentioned them both is that I think the thing I noticed at Google when I was exposed to just like went from like small seaside town 2.5 years later working in like an office that had as many people as the time. And it was just like, I knew nothing about them. And I think that not knowing anything beyond like surface level, or it takes you a really long time to do research on like who I am before I come on the podcast or who I'm speaking to today on the podcast. And without that information, that's the barrier to truly authentic. Like I had hoped the internet was designed to connect us in like this authentic way to people that might be like us. And unfortunately, I think the social networks of the last 10 to 15 years have focused a little bit too much on like distribution and content promotion and influencers and building followers. And I think it's stripped away a lot of the who are you actually and what are your passions and interests? Because if the entire world is posting online, optimizing for likes, I think that by definition, that changes how you want to present yourself online. And so it's becoming harder and harder to actually find someone that you have something in common with. And I felt that at Google. Like I was literally just trying to, get in touch with my colleagues and across the water. And all I knew about them was I could look them up in our internal system. Like they're also a product designer. And it's like, but sure, but like, what did they work on and what are they passionate about? And so that was my first exposure to the overarching problem that the internet is getting noisier and noisier, and lack of focus on identity and who we are, particularly I've always been more from a professional angle. Like I really wanted to solve the problem within the workplace. And so, yeah, truthfully, it wasn't that we started saying, let's empower and enable the polywork economy. It was really a case of we want to connect people like authentically to each other. And that's why you'll see in the Polywork product, there's a big focus on expressing who you are, through those badges. You could put product designer or podcaster, but you could also put like dog dad or, coffee enthusiast. There's like literally over 15,000 of these like unique badges on people's profiles. And we really use that as the basis to then connect you with people that might be like you. And so it really started with a problem. The Polywork piece really came in when we just noticed that you always, when doing a startup, I think have to answer the question, why does now make sense to do this? Like there is a graveyard of companies that have tried to build like new professional networks. And for us, I think the answer was, particularly during the pandemic, through either people being forced to because they'd lost their jobs, or they were struggling a lot with their 9 to 5 and this new reality of working from home, they started to polywork more. And because they were starting a podcast or an Etsy store or a side project, the opportunity opened up to then say, well, no other platform today lets you put your entire identity together. And that's where the name Polywork came from, like meaning many types of work. That's it really came from, let's solve that problem of like human connection online. How do I just find a product designer who's open to speaking on my podcast that's passionate about JavaScript? And that combination of information, I don't understand why, but like even Twitter, I'm sure, it's kind of the main social network we all use.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about anybody on it except for how loud they scream about a topic. And when everyone's screaming really loud about a topic, it kind of just gets exhausting, and I'm a little burnt out from the irony of a social media founder sitting here saying he's burnt out from social media, but we're trying to, I think, bring a little bit of the early magic of the internet back, where like, what if you could just connect with people like you that want to do the same things as you? Like, wouldn't that be interesting? And it's a big bet. And so I like working on big bets. So
yeah, no, 100% with you. I mean, if we look back the last 2-3 years, I think everyone's been on a journey. And there is, as I said a few minutes ago, more and more people having something alongside their day job. And it does seem, as you highlighted there, traditional online communities are just not serving those that want to do more than one thing. And there is more and more of them. And for me personally, I started out as IT guy by day while building this as a side hustle. And I was a writer and podcaster by night, trying to avoid being for me, it was all about avoiding being tapped on the shoulder when my face no longer fitted in the shoulder and I was a man of a certain age, and that's it. You're kind of screwed over.
Exactly.
Really.
Honestly, that's like, I think it is. I know there's a lot, by the way, of like people that post about whether or not literally like every other positive article, naturally with everyone with their opinions, and they're fine to have them. There's like all this polywork, contributing to burnout culture. Like, are they encouraging you when you quite literally take the definition? But to your point, it's a lot more about just like passions of stuff, but
Yeah.
it's also like for me too, it's like a safety valve of like when you work in an early stage, particularly consumer startup, you're sort of saying that your career is binary. Either
Yeah.
you're going to end up after a decade being worth zero, maybe you've had a good time, or it's going to really work. And so Polywork is just the way to kind of, to your point, like if I get a knock on the shoulder, it's like, well, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Nice try though. Like a lot of consumer companies don't. It's like, well, what else was I up to? And particularly, I think a lot of people tie their 9 to 5 job to their core identity. And so if you are losing that, particularly during, all the layoffs that are happening, I think having another outlet to be creative and collab with people beyond even just like I love my colleagues at Google, and the team we've assembled at Polywork is the best team I've worked with. But it's fun sometimes to do this stuff, right? To come on a podcast and meet someone new, you learn things, right? Or like work on a side project. Or I think it's one of the reasons why in tech people do a lot of, particularly you've seen the trend of, just designers, engineers, whoever, just working in tech or angel investing. They're not even writing big angel investment checks. It's like 5 to 10K each that work in tech. But the reason they do it is because it gives them that fractional relationship with the founder, which is exciting, I think, and energizing outside of 9 to 5. So, I mean, I'm obviously like drinking the Kool-Aid, but I think there's a lot of reasons to Polywork and to do those bits and pieces. But yeah, the do it by night thing is usually where people start, kind of like how you started your podcast.
Apologies for interrupting the interview, but this podcast is brought to you by Flipper, the #1 marketplace to buy and sell online businesses and startups. So my quick question to you is, do you own or run your own online business? And have you ever considered selling your site, your store, your tech, or your app? Well, with world-class combined matching technology, dedicated brokers and end-to-end services, all at the most efficient price, Flipper makes selling your online business simple. So to get a free valuation, simply visit flipper.com/techtalks, where each month thousands of online business owners exit with Flipper. Again, to learn more, visit flipper.com/techtalks. But now back to the interview. So what advice would you offer for anyone listening anywhere in the world seeking more from life than their 9 to 5, but unsure how to get started? And by that, I also mean including those diversifying their portfolios or picking up new skills and work streams to soften the blow, just in case they fall the victim of the next layoff. Because yes, there is a lot of layoffs at the moment, but also there's a huge tech shortage that we keep hearing about, tech skill shortage. So there's a lot of opportunities too, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I hope with obviously the layoffs that are happening are terrible. I hope that a lot, I mean, to give you an example, we had 2 open roles and we filled them both from Twitter, which was, and so I think there's going to be a downstream benefit to startups that maybe usually struggled to get talent that was joining those sorts of businesses. But I think for starting the site, well, first of all, visit polywork.com, like I think the #1 barrier right now to people doing that is, where do I start? Like, how do I, maybe they have a topic they're passionate about, but they don't know how they want to get started. Is it build a side project, an Etsy store, like start a podcast to talk about it, become a content creator? And so I think just heading over to polywork.com and just trying to get inspiration from others that are, I mean, quite literally looking for groups on the platform of like product designers who are all working on side projects. And I think there's just like so many resources now, not just on our platform, but in others, of just like, how do you even get started? And what does it mean to incorporate a business? And how do you balance that 9 to 5? Like, there were even questions we were talking about, like, can I tell my boss that I'm working on a side project? And so I think just like getting knowledgeable of how to actually get there. And my one bit of advice, because we've seen a lot of it. I mean, the Polywork trend, there's some people doing it and just, like I mentioned before, like making incredible amounts of side income. I think the key trend we see with the folks that do it the most on our platform and work out is when they picked kind of maybe 2 things. It's very much related to the 9 to 5 work that they have. Like I don't know if all of your guests are tech or entrepreneur, but you started in tech. And then, so I think there's a lot of people that maybe they're a designer today, or they're a marketing manager. Their podcast goes on to become advice for getting into marketing and interviewing marketing leaders. And so there's always, I think, the ones that we've seen be most successful is there's a very strong relationship between whatever their 9 to 5 was. And then they've started to either put that into a passion project or monetize it on the side. Like a very common one is coaching. There's a lot of people making side income from coaching folks. Perfect example, you've recorded 2,000 episodes. There are tens of thousands of people on our platform that are trying to learn about how to start a podcast. And you have the playbook on how to do it and how to get amazing guests on it, right? And then I think the second thing is just that you're passionate about it. The ones that the data we see behind it in the platform is that typically the ones that start purely for money, they run their course pretty quickly. Like you have to be sort of passionate about the topic that you're starting in, not clearly just jumping into a project for the sake of, a quick return. We haven't seen much longevity with those sorts of projects on the platform.
Yeah, I've lost count of the amount of people that say, Neil, I've got a podcast, I got 3 episodes. How do I monetize it? I'm like, man, you got to build the audience.
You need a bit more of a library first.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when we're talking about Polywork and the work that you're doing here, what do people most misunderstand about it? Or are there any myths that we can finally lay to rest that might frustrate you?
Yeah, I think that when people hear the word, we quite literally got the word in the dictionary, which was like amazing win. But I think sometimes when people hear it, they think it means to work multiple jobs at once. So a huge part of what we're trying to do this year, in addition to building out the product and finding that product market fit, is just educating the world on what it means to do it. And it is very much the pursuit of passion projects in addition to 9 to 5. Like we're not a platform for freelancers. Freelancers don't use the platform. Like they do kind of full time for lots of different clients. Like we're very much a platform for people that do 9 to 5 and want to either purely for passion or for profit launch a side project or do something on the side, whether it's the podcast, the advisory. And so I think the biggest misconception is people think it's, why would I want to work multiple jobs?
Yeah.
And we're not really the platform for working multiple full-time jobs. And then there's also a misconception around that we're a platform for freelancers, but there are lots of great platforms out there, whether it's Upwork or Fiverr for, finding freelance projects. And we don't do that. We're the 92-ish% of our user base works full time. But they just thought like, great, I want to do something else on the side there's a third reason. Sometimes people purely want to jump on our platform to expand their network because they're a little, bored working from home and just want to broaden their horizons and start picking up some gigs, speaking on podcasts or whatever it might be.
And before you came on the podcast, I was doing a little research on you, and I quickly learned that you've launched a startup right before COVID, including having to let staff go and then rebuilding, which included hiring nearly your entire full staff again. But I'm curious, what were the biggest lessons that you learned during this time? Because people always say that the startup journey is a roller coaster ride of dips and huge climbs, but you seem to have experienced it all in a short amount of time. So what did you learn from that period?
Yeah, that was a brutal. We closed down the last business. And then the last, I think maybe like 550K in the bank was used to like start, it was more just like, cool, is there any other way you want to solve this problem? And so, yeah, we I think in total around that time, we let go of up to 30 people, went down to 5. And then you go through all the gnarliness. So we actually like recapitalized the business. Never fun to call 55 investors during a pandemic and tell them that business A is closing down, equity is gone. Would you like, to invest in company B? I want to caveat, I benefit a lot from hindsight with the answer to this question, but I think it taught me to just be a lot calmer. I don't mind. My entire identity was tied up in that like first startup, and we raised from very famous investors. And when you're closing it down, like you quite literally are pushed to the edge of, and during a pandemic too, like your small apartment with a dog barking half the time, you're kind of, that was great. Like it was a super tough, like few months, but I think coming through it I look back on it and I think I'm glad I was honest and like upfront. And one of the biggest learnings is I was super surprised. There were always like angel investors and some investors that, maybe I'd struggled and could have done a better job keeping in touch with. But for the most part, particularly the investors that we didn't return the money for, the guys that had written, the $5 million, $10 million plus checks for the last business, like one of their first questions was like, what's next? And I was in my own little world of like, I'm never going to be able to be an entrepreneur again. And one of the biggest learnings was, one of the team at James Fitzgerald of Valar Ventures said, "Oh, in the 7 years you've tried to build this thing, we made 1,000 bets, and a lot of them worked. You made one and it didn't. So your job is way harder than ours. What are you doing next?" And they were immediately interested in what I was doing next. And I needed that pick me up. And so I think it was a good lesson in always being honest and just ripping the Band-Aid off. And I think there were elements where everyone got in their own head during the pandemic. And I think now, if a fire goes on in the company, I kind of learned to like laugh it off a little bit more. I think that's what it's taught me, is when you have to close down an entire business and let go of people you've worked. There was some of the team I'd worked with for, like 5+ years. Fortunately, 4 of them are back. They were my first rehires back to the business, to the new business. So Marley and Meg and Sean and Darren and a few others are here at the new company. But yeah, I think most of it is just about just like not losing your shit. Yeah. And staying calm and thinking that, there's always, I think the one thing, tech gets a lot of criticism from the press and everything, but the one thing that it is incredible for is the community of people that want you to try again and to do that. And so like failure culture in general, it actually inspired me to create I have the failure badge on my Polywork profile that I created. And there was this trend at one point of a lot of more people adding that badge to their profile and sharing like the anti-resume, like sharing the stuff that didn't work out. And that's like perfect, because I wanted to create like a more human environment on the platform. But tech does that really well, that it encourages people to almost to start again immediately if you have the energy for it, and that I think is a really good trait of tech, that like, just if you're going to, I think I wish I just failed a little faster. I think, 6.5 years in the first business, I think I probably could have, hindsight was my first business, but to any other founder that's maybe tried something that hasn't worked like 100 times, like that, you only really hear of the Medium articles that I write or founders write, or you hear like the snippets on podcasts, but most of the time there's like 6,000 other failures like under the belt that just like never even got, like my first podcast episode, I think, second podcast episode was listened to like 6 times. And the world's so fast now that I think people aren't really paying too much attention to, so it's kind of like there's almost like you have that cover to just keep trying until, because people will notice when it sticks. Yeah. And I'm very much against people, criticizing entrepreneurs for trying and failing, different times. I've definitely learned that, as long as I've got energy and I'm focused on the problem, I will, it's wonderful to be in tech for that reason, because you get to you get a couple of second chances, which is awesome.
Well, great answer. As we look towards the future, though, what excites you most about the future of work? Because the workplace is continuously evolving. My son is currently living the digital nomad dream. He's working in Cambodia through his remote role here in the UK. So, what excites you about that future and the role that Polywork will play in the future?
Yeah, I love that. Look, it's funny. I'm like very much within the work setting, a people person. And you could ask anyone in my team, I was so against going remote as a business. Like to the point where I owe my previous COO, Jason, for this, that the pandemic, like it was around that time you're starting to be told to go home and just work from home while this pandemic thing was happening, sort of like April 2020. And I was like, nope, I want to purchase the lease on the office. And he really persuaded me not to do that. But now I'm completely switched. Like I love working remotely. We have I'm like a couple of minutes walk from Dumbo. We have a small little co-working thing that we can go into if we want. It's optional. And most of us do go in every Friday. And I've been in the last couple of days because people visited. But I think like what your son is doing in Cambodia is the future. I think that there's enough tools. And I think between it being enough tools to track what people are working on, their performance, and top talent is just going to want more control over their lives. And I think that's an amazing thing. So I'm a huge remote work proponent, and because I love it. It gives me flexibility. And I also think that I would love to see, obviously like it's hard to not talk about AI with the amount of buzz that's happening in the world with it at the moment. But I think also for the workplace with the polywork trend, I think it's definitely our job as a company to raise the profile of it. But I would almost say that it's one thing we noticed with all our data from last year. It's something that everyone is doing already almost. And we just need to really create the category around it and give people the tools in order to do it. And so I hope that particularly with Gen Z when I look to the future over the next 10 years, that they're the first generation that when they, even during college or university, they are starting to work on multiple projects at once. And that they might be the generation in 10 years that it doesn't even cross their minds to go get a 9-to-5 gig, because there are so many tools. They can work remotely and they're just able to do lots of different things at once. And that's why we want to be at like the forefront of trying to pushing these sorts of these new ways of working forward in fractional ways, and trying to educate companies on, actually, you made a point earlier, if companies get on board with letting folks work from home, try other projects, the talent is happier in routines. And this is, a lot of people don't like this. There's a full tech cohort that's like hard 9-to-5. When I promote Polywork, I'm not saying people shouldn't be phenomenal at their jobs. Like, that's quite literally my job as a CEO, to make sure everyone works their asses off and that we ship regularly and learn things and get new users. But I have seen firsthand what the benefit is if people also have passion projects to pursue outside, or how less stressed they are if they have a side income coming in that sort of like helps them. And so I'd love to see like more mass adoption and just people speaking more openly about how they polywork over the next 10 years. Remote work and polywork, I think, are two. I mean, I'm betting kind of at least the mid part of my career, my 30s, on those things not being a fad and not being a trend, but being something that's like here to stay.
We started the podcast today talking about your origin story, what put you on this path. Now, as we come full circle, I'm going to throw a few quick questions your way. The first is going to be, is there a book that you can leave us with that we can add to our Amazon wish list so other listeners can check that out? And also, I'm also going to ask you, if you could have lunch with anyone, anywhere, or a breakfast, who would it be and why? Because there's a lot of people listen to this podcast that we might be able to play the role of connector and maybe even manifest something together. So what book would you choose, and who would you like to have lunch with and why?
This isn't the book, but the reason I mention it is because for a long time, Shoe Dog was just like a life-changing book for me. And I read one this year that topped it, it's called Who is Michael Ovitz? Have you heard of it?
No, not that one. I've heard of Shoe Dog, obviously, but not that one.
Yeah, I mean, I love Shoe Dog for a million reasons. But Who is Michael Ovitz? It's written in a very simple. It's written by, like, Shoe Dog is written by Phil Knight, and this is written by Michael Ovitz, who really created a lot of the modern day Hollywood. He was like the power agent, and it documents his journey from. And it's pretty controversial. Hollywood is not a perfect industry, but the reason I loved it, it was written in firsthand, documents his internship up to, really becoming like one of the most powerful forces in not just Hollywood, but in media and in tech as well. And it spans the world and the journey and also his downfall, because there was definitely a downfall part of it. And the reason I loved it is because, well, first of all, it's just very raw and incredibly authentic and honest, the same way that Shoe Dog is. And I think any entrepreneur or anyone starting something should read it. But the reason I was so impressed by it, I think this is related to all the trends we've been talking about today, is that other entrepreneurs were selling a product and he wasn't. It was always just himself. He was the product, and he had to reinvent himself and be this chameleon from situation to situation and decade to decade. And as someone where their product is themselves, to sustain that long and to be that successful from an internship. And it just really taught me the importance of those sort of soft skills and relationships and communication, and just looking at your career across like a 50-year trajectory. And just, I don't think there's a more impressive entrepreneur, actually. I mean, many of my friends debate it when I say that a lot. They really, because, there's a lot of folklore and love for the Steve Jobs of the world. But I just think he is one of, certainly, look, I don't know him. And so, but from the book, I just was blown away by his product was him. And I thought it was.
So would he be the guy that you want to have lunch with as well?
Oh, I would not, I mean, I think he's a little busy for me, but I would not say no. I mean, yeah, of course, but I actually, I think, Satya from Microsoft is,
Yeah.
Just because of how long I've worked in the professional space. And I think that I see a world where I'm convinced where it's going. And I think that, in particularly just, the Microsoft investment in OpenAI recently, and there's just been a few moves that he has made over the last 10 years that I think probably put him up there as the world's best CEO. And I'm trying to, whether it's through reading a book or, getting 10 minutes with somebody someday type of stuff, like to learn from folks like that. I think that his foresight in where the world is going, and I don't know if he believes in the Polywork trend and people wanting to pursue those passion projects, but I really, really do. And so I think that would be a fun debate and lunch. So I'd probably, next time he has a spare hour, I'd probably try to get the Microsoft CEO for a lunch, just to trade notes on where we think the future of the workplace is going.
Why not? Well, I'll throw that out into the ether, see if we can make something happen.
Yeah. You got the distribution, and I don't have many followers, so maybe you can help.
And for everyone listening, what's the best way to find you online, your team at Polywork, or anything else that we talked about today? And of course, your podcast as well, if you can let me know what that is.
Yeah. It's just called Polywork Conversations. Not a lot of episodes, but head over to polywork.com, check out the platform if you're interested in, a place to showcase all the different things you're doing and find projects and collaborators. And then I'm just at Multiplayer on Twitter, but the E is a 3, or just my Poly page is poly.me/Peter. So a couple of them, trying to build my presence this year,
Yeah, man. Well, as we said at the very beginning, traditional online communities aren't serving those that want to do more than one thing. And Polywork is rapidly becoming the place to discover opportunities to collaborate with other professionals. I love everything you stand for. I love the story behind it, the journey that you've been on, and even had time to leave us with a book and someone you'd like to have lunch with. So just a big thank you from me for sitting down and sharing your story.
Anytime. Thank you for an amazing guest. I'm flattered to be on it. I love doing it.
And I'm curious, anybody listening, do you have a side hustle, a passion project? And how do you get the support that you need? And have you checked the Polywork website? Have you joined the community? What did you like? What did you didn't like? Whatever it might be, I'd love to hear from you. Simply email me at techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you would like to slide into my DMs and send me an audio message on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok, you can find me at Neil C. Hughes. I always like to finish every episode by saying technology works best when it brings people together. And the fact that you tune in every single day further proves that point. So I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.